Scoutmaster Tom sat with his troop around the campfire. It was their first overnight trip, and the 5 boys, they were all giddy with excitement. All around them, the woods echoed with the song of chirping crickets and the gentle breeze. The boys roasted their s'mores while chatting about girls, using a vocabulary that Tom deemed not suitable for 10-year-olds. "Hey, watch the language, boys. We may be in the woods, but we're not animals." The scouts laughed and shook their heads. "I'm sorry. I thought this was supposed to be the big make men out of us trip," Johnny said with a smile. "Well, yes it is, but we're scouts, not sailors. So I suggest you take things down a couple of notches or you'll be sleeping out here all night. Find something else to talk about." "How about a ghost story?" asked Mark. And this seemed to excite the boys, and they turned towards their elder with wide eyes. Tom chuckled and shook his head. "Oh, come on. You said you've been in the Scouts since you were our age. You must have heard some great stories around your campfires," Frank encouraged. Tom sighed. He wasn't sure if the boys were ready for this story, but he knew that they would not leave him alone without hearing one. "Okay, boys, I do have one, but I didn't hear this around a campfire. This story, it is something that actually happened to me." The boys suddenly became more interested, and an ominous wind blew through the camp, making the fire dance for the perfect ambience. "This was during my first overnight camping trip, on a night just like tonight," Tom said in his best creepy voice. Justin laughed. "Let me guess, it was in these very woods." Tom looked at him with a dead seriousness. "Yes, it was." The boys looked shocked and leaned in closer. It was the night of a full moon, and the forest was brimming with a sinister energy. We were talking about what we would do if werewolves or vampires stormed our camp. We laughed and joked about this, but we were quite unaware of the very real monster that was lurking just beyond the trees. The wind picked up at this point, shaking the trees around them, sending a shiver down all the boys' backs. I had awoken in the middle of the night, feeling my own call of nature. I left the tent to relieve myself, and when I came back, I noticed something incredible. On the ground, in our camp, was a very clear and equally fresh set of deer tracks. I was very excited because in all of our nature walks, we had never encountered an actual deer. My mind drifted to my bag where I had a particular item stored. You see, it is an unwritten Boy Scout rule that a camper will always bring at least one banned item with them. Most brought things like Game Boys or adult magazines. For me though, I brought my Polaroid camera. I wanted a picture of that deer, and the rules about venturing alone at night, they can be damned. I was going to get it. Now, all I wish was that I had gone to bed and shut my eyes tight. The boys around the fire were speechless. This was the most quiet Tom had ever seen them. Even the woods seemed to quiet down, as if nature itself wanted to listen in. Alright, so I quietly grabbed my camera from my pack and I ran out into the night, following the deer tracks. I was initially worried about venturing through the darkness. However, the shining full moon above It provided the perfect lighting. I was very thankful for that, because a sprained ankle from stepping in a hole or something, it would have ruined the trip for everyone, and my fellow scouts would never let me hear the end of it. As I walked through the shadowy trees, I could feel the eyes of the animals in the forest glued onto me, tracking my every step. I began to feel afraid, and I considered turning around. But I knew that the deer could not have gotten far. I followed the tracks intently. But that was when I noticed something strange about the tracks. "What was it?" Mitchell asked, with a genuine tone of fear in his voice. "I noticed that they were getting bigger," Tom said, sending a quiet gasp through the boys. The tracks, they seemed to be increasing in size with every step. First, I thought maybe the deer was increasing speed, and therefore pressure. But they were getting far too big for any deer on record. Then, something far stranger happened. The tracks, they began to change shape. The hoof print, it grew longer, narrower. The foot had begun to grow toes, and each one was tipped with an increasingly long claw. A single word flashed in my mind: wolf. My heart, it beat in my chest, and I considered turning around. But I took a closer look instead. It didn't take me long to figure out that whatever these tracks were, they were certainly not wolf tracks. Wolves, they were more rounded feet, but this was long, and damn, it was almost human in nature. My mind swirled with the stories of werewolves, but I shook my head in denial. Nothing about the nature of these tracks made sense. I had to follow them further. I continued my journey, watching the tracks morph in front of me. They became more skeletal, and yet each track sunk deeper into the ground, indicating a great change in weight. They started looking less humanish and more monstrous. At the mention of monsters, a strange sound emitted from the bush just beyond the camp. Tom wasted no time in shining his emergency light at the brush, but he found no sign of what made the noise. He sat down and continued the tale for his captive audience. These tracks, they took me deeper into the woods, deep into where even the light of the moon struggled to pierce. With every step, I could feel the beat in my chest grow louder and louder. Finally, the trail led to what I could only assume was the lair of the beast. There was this small cave with a bit of moss hanging down in front of its mouth. I began to shake and slowly back away. It was not the darkness of the cave or what lay within its depths that frightened me. It was the smell. The cave radiated with a smell that was horrible beyond measure. I wouldn't understand the smell until years later, when I found a dead gopher under my house. This was the smell of decay, the smell of death. I feared whatever made that smell, and I was about to turn around. That was when I heard a sound coming from in that cave. All 12 eyes around the campfire were glued to the Scoutmaster. The boys were completely enthralled, and Tom knew it was time to finish his tale. This sound, it was a strange one that I still can't completely identify. On the surface, it sounded like a growl, but there was the slightest hint of something behind it, something human. It was then that the forest truly came alive, as if summoned by the creature's growl. Every animal, every insect in the forest erupted into their own cries. The sound was completely deafening, to the point where I thought my ears would burst. I didn't understand how the others at camp didn't hear it. Suddenly, I felt a tap at my shoulder, and I swear, I felt my soul leaving my body. I jolted up, and there was my fellow scout Donnie, staring at me. Relief burst through me, and I noticed that the animal calls had stopped, as if they never existed. Donnie asked me what I was doing out of bed, and I told him about the tracks. I was about to say that we should head back when I saw something that made my blood freeze, despite the warm summer heat. Behind Donnie, I could see his tracks in the dirt, and they did not come from the direction of camp. The tracks had come directly from the cave. I shook in fear, and Donnie stared at me with a smile that bordered on the macabre. I looked into my friend's green eyes that were almost glowing in the moonlight. Were his eyes always green? I asked myself. Donnie's smile grew, and maybe it was just a trick of the light, but I swear I saw some pointed fangs in his mouth. "Come on, Tommy. There's something I want to show you. Trust me, you'll remember it forever." I followed his finger. He was pointing into the cave. I shook my head and I took a step back, but he continued to point. Come, my friend, join me. I can show you such wonders." His eyes grew brighter, and they shone almost like a cat's eyes. He began to inch towards me with his hand outstretched, and I noticed that his fingers were clawed. That was enough for me, and I ran back towards our camp. I didn't dare turn back, not for the life of me, but I could hear him following. Every step this thing took, it caused a louder boom, and each one was growing closer to me. There was no way that I could outrun this thing. And then, inspiration struck me like a bolt of lightning. I grabbed my Polaroid camera, aimed it behind me, and snapped a picture. The intense flash of the camera, it had its desired effect, and it blinded the beast. I could hear a mighty roar from behind me, and I finally made it back to camp. I ran straight into my tent, and to my surprise, Donnie was there in his sleeping bag. I almost ran back out again, but he lay there, snoring away, and I knew that this was really Donnie. I got into my sleeping bag, and I stared at the tent flap, just waiting for a claw to swipe down it. I don't know how long I sat there staring at that door, but I must have fallen asleep, because the next thing I knew, it was morning. I couldn't believe that I'd survived the night. In the light of day, realism began to wash over me, and I figured that I must have dreamed this whole encounter. We packed up and I was relieved to be leaving. However, as we were marching down the trail, I noticed something laying on the ground. The unmistakable back of a Polaroid picture. I trembled as I picked it up, and when I turned it over, I almost screamed. The picture was extremely blurry, but I could make out 2 glowing green eyes and what looked like a set of razor-sharp teeth. The boys all let out a sigh at this point. "Why didn't you tell anyone about the picture?" Justin asked. Tom shrugged. "Well, to this day, I maintain that I must have been sleepwalking, and I took a picture." Frank shook his head. "But the eyes?" Tom laughed. "Most likely just fireflies. But who knows? The picture was too blurry to tell anything." The boys continued to argue about whether or not it was a dream. They argued about what type of creature it might have been. Tom simply smiled to himself. He had chosen a good story, and everyone was enthralled by it. In fact, they were all so enthralled that no one, not even the Scoutmaster, noticed that there were now 6 boys instead of 5, all 12 eyes around the campfire. No one noticed until it was too late.